All right, everyone, thank you for coming today. Really appreciate it. This is the USS Dorado Project. The Dorado Project is a cooperative group of 3 very dedicated volunteers. First and foremost is our project manager, Thaddeus Weaver of Newport, Rhode Island. Unfortunately, due to a death in the family, Thaddeus was not able to make it here today, but he is with us in spirit. He is the founder of the project, and he is the driving force behind it. This is his brainchild, and hopefully Steve and I will be able to do the project justice today. I am the historian and the technical consultant for the project, and Steve is our search area development, document research, and funding guru. So we all have different responsibilities. I'm also the webmaster for the Dorado Project webpage, which is an adjunct add-on portion to pigboats.com. So we would encourage you to go there because of time restraints, some of the things that we're going to tell you today are going to be pretty brief, but our project website gives exhaustive detail in what we found out and developed so far for the Dorado Project. The Dorado Project, we have 4 major goals. First and foremost, it is our goal to find the wreck and document it with photographic and video means to the greatest extent possible. The second goal, using that information and data that we develop from finding the wreck, we want to develop a comprehensive loss scenario. The loss of the Dorado is a major mystery. Nobody really for sure knows what happens to the boat. And if we are successful in finding it, we're going to use the data that we get there to help develop a comprehensive loss scenario. What happened, why it happened, and so on. We also want to properly honor the dedication and the sacrifice of the crew. This was a crew of 77 sailors that left Groton, Connecticut on the 6th of October, and it's just vanished. They're gone, and their families have, to this day, still don't know what happened to them. And lastly, and this is really probably the second most important goal, the crew of the Dorado was never awarded the Purple Heart Medal due to a bureaucratic oversight. This is a tradition and a standard within the submarine service for any of the boats that were lost in a combat zone, and Dorado was actually lost in a combat zone. And we believe that due to a bureaucratic oversight at the end of the war, the Purple Heart Medal was never awarded to the crew. So Steve will cover that a little bit more in detail, but that's really one of our prime goals other than actually finding the wreck site. Okay, the USS Dorado was a Gato-class submarine. It was built at the Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut. Her keel was laid on the 27th of August, 1942. She was launched on the 23rd of May, 1943, and she was commissioned on the 28th of August, 1943. The timing there is really kind of astounding. In a period of covering only 1 year, she went from just basic steel frames to a completed and commissioned submarine. The pace of construction was quick. She departed the submarine base in New London on the 6th of October 1943 to join the U.S. war effort in the Pacific and was never heard from again. One of the things about Dorado, due to the fact that she had a fairly short service life, we don't really have a whole lot of good photos of her. The 2 that you see here, the one in the upper right and the one in the lower left, they're part of about a half dozen photographs that we have of Dorado. So in order to get an idea for what she looked like, we've included a photo down here in the lower right of the USS Flasher that was built alongside the Dorado at the Electric Boat Company. And we believe that the Flasher here is configured in much the same way that the Dorado was. The Gato-class fleet submarines were very large submarines. They're 311 feet long, 27 feet wide, and they displaced 1,500 tons on the surface. I can do that.
Thank you.
All right. So these were large submarines. They carried 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft, and they carried 24 torpedoes. These were among the most heavily armed submarines of any nation in the Second World War. They were built that way because they had to make 75-day patrols from Hawaii to Japan, spend 2 to 3 weeks in the combat zone off Japan, and then come back. So they were big, they were heavily armed. In addition to the torpedoes, they also had a variety of deck guns on the main deck. And these features are what we're going to use, along with some of these photographs and the photographs of her sister ship to help identify the boat once she's actually found, if she's actually found. This picture here on the left is an interesting one. It shows in the center here, it shows the Dorado under construction at the Victory Yard of Electric Boat. This is a yard that was added on as an adjunct yard from the main production facility upstream. It shows both Dace and Flasher also under construction, and it shows you the modular way that the submarines were built in the Second World War. They prefabricated sections in other parts of the yard. They brought them down to the building slip, they attached them to the keel, and eventually they slid backward into the water into the Thames River. The photo on the right shows the submarine alongside what's called the fitting out pier at the Victory Yard. The boats, when they were launched, were not 100% complete. They were typically somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 70% complete, and they did that to clear the building way so that they could lay another keel down. And this submarine here is shown alongside the fitting out pier, and the EB workers are just swarming over it, doing all the finishing touches and installing all of the remaining gear. This picture has long been attributed as the Dorado, but our research has not been able to confirm that this boat is actually a Dorado. We included it here as a representative of what she might look like, but this picture here very well may be one of the Dorado's sister subs. The Dorado, since there's so few pictures of her in the National Archives, we were able to pull this booklet of general plans for the Dorado, and this shows how she was configured when she was commissioned in the Navy and when she finally left Groton, Connecticut on the 6th of October, 1943. She is a classic Gato design boat. There were two major variations, one that was built by Electric Boat and one that was built at the government shipyards. They were pretty much identical, but there's a couple of variations on it that will help us identify the wreck if and when we ever find it. The major part is right here in the center of the boat, this structure. It's called the conning tower fairwater. Above the main pressure hull, which is down here at the bottom, this is the main pressure hull. Above the main pressure hull was a separate cylindrical pressure hull that's called the conning tower. It had the periscope stations, it had a helm station, it had the torpedo data computer, and some other equipment. That structure there was designed to smooth or flow the water around the conning tower and make it easier, supposedly to reduce drag. The original design of that fairwater was much, much larger, and it gave the boats a very large silhouette when it was on the surface, making it very easy for the Japanese to see them at night or in the daytime. Almost as soon as the war started, there was an effort made to start cutting down that fairwater, making it smaller, thus reducing the silhouette. And this shows the fairwater on the Dorado with the aft bulwark removed and the forward pilot house removed. The bridge is right here in the center. That remained in its previous spot in the same spot. Those two areas where they cut down the fairwater, they created a nice little gun deck, and she has a 20 millimeter anti-aircraft gun on both of those gun decks. The other major part here is this support structure right here, which is called the periscope shears. She had two periscopes, and that structure supports the scopes when they're raised. On the forward edge of those shears is a mast for the SJ surface search radar, and on the aft part of those shears is another mast for another radar called the SD that was used to detect aircraft. It seems like some minutia to talk about, but those are actually very important points if and when the wreck is ever found. We will take a look at that stuff and use that as a data point for NHHC for them to confirm the identity of the wreck. As I said, this is the main pressure hull right here. This structure that sits atop it is called the superstructure. And that superstructure formed a walking deck when the boat was on the surface. It also contained exhaust and intake piping for the engines, and up front it contained the operating gear for the bow diving planes. Another distinctive feature is right here along the bottom edge of that superstructure, a series of holes that were drilled. The specific pattern that these holes are drilled is indicative of the Electric Boat variation for the Gato class, and that's another feature that we're going to use to help identify the wreck if and when it's found. Also the anchor. Strangely enough, that's a distinctive feature. The Electric Boat variation had the anchor on the starboard side, as it's shown here, and the submarines built at the government shipyards had the anchor on the port side. So that'll help us distinguish the wreck. Okay, let's get into what we think actually happened to the Dorado. The Dorado got underway with her movement order that was issued to her in the first week of October, and she headed out into the Atlantic. We actually have a copy of the Dorado's movement order, and in it were 7 navigational waypoints labeled Able through George. George being the last one, which was 15 nautical miles north of the Cristobal Breakwater, which formed the harbor on the Caribbean side of the Panama Canal. This was the first leg of Dorado's voyage out to the Pacific to the war zone. She was to transit the Panama Canal and then head out to Hawaii, refuel and reprovision in Hawaii, and be assigned her first war patrol. Probably would have conducted that sometime in the fall, probably November of 1943. This route was very specific. She had to hit each one of those navigational waypoints. A key point about this, her transit down through the Atlantic. She had to reach Point George, the last navigation waypoint there, at a very specific date and time, 11 a.m. on the 14th of October, 1943. She was to do that because she was to rendezvous with a destroyer and be escorted to the harbor at the Caribbean side of the Panama Canal. She had to be there at a specific time. If she was late or if she was early, it caused a lot of problems, right? And it was also to prevent, ironically, a friendly fire incident. So she was to be escorted on the surface to the mouth of the Panama Canal once she reached Point George. Arriving at Point George at that date and time also dictated what's called her speed of advance, how fast she had to make that transit. That speed of advance to make it to Point George on time was 14 knots. That's a very important data point as well because that dictated that Dorado had to make the majority of this transit on the surface. Her maximum submerged speed was only 8 knots. And at 8 knots, she's only going to last for about an hour before her batteries go dead. She could go farther if she went slower, but she's going to fall further and further behind. She had to maintain that average speed of 14 knots, and that dictated that she made the majority of this transit on the surface. Now, the captain, Lieutenant Commander Earl Caffrey Schneider, was given the latitude in the orders to dive as he saw necessary to conduct training or to run drills, but they couldn't stay submerged for very long because they would fall behind and not make that point on time. Excuse me. The speed of 14 knots also dictated what's called the point of intended movement, or PIM. The point of intended movement was the point along this track that she was at any given point in time. To keep Dorado safe, one of the things they did was establish what's called a submarine sanctuary zone based upon that point of intended movement. That zone was a rectangular box, 15 nautical miles on either side of the track, 50 miles ahead of the track, and 100 miles behind. Dorado and Captain Schneider had the latitude to operate anywhere within that box. The box was designed to prevent friendly fire incidences, to alert U.S. and Allied forces that there was a friendly submarine transiting. Don't bomb anything in that area. They were absolutely prohibited from bombing anything within the submarine sanctuary zone. Another aspect of this transit through the Atlantic was the fact that Dorado was following what's called a zigzag course. Zigzagging means she's going to jink to the left and then back to the right and back to the left and so on along the base course. The intention of that was to make it more difficult for enemy U-boats, which were known to operate all along the Atlantic seaboard and into the Caribbean, make it more difficult for them to obtain a firing control solution on the Dorado and potentially attack her with torpedoes. One of the other elements here is that she was to be traveling under radio silence. Radio silence means that she was not to use her radio to make any broadcasts for routine message traffic. She wasn't going to report where she was at any given time. She was not to make any sort of routine radio transmissions. The captain had the latitude to make a radio transmission if he felt it was operationally necessary, if he was going to be late, if he was going to be early, if there was some sort of material casualty on the boat that might affect her condition, or if he felt it was serious enough.
What was her surface top speed?
21 knots. But at 21 knots, they can't maintain that for very long because it's a complicated reason, but she could do 21 knots. Okay? So We know that based upon her point of intended movement, her speed of advance, and this course, on the evening of October 12, 1943, she was in a position in the East Central Caribbean between Point Easy and Point Fox. Keep that in mind, it's going to become quite important later. We know that she never arrived at Point George. So when Steve and Thaddeus and I were developing this whole case, we took a look at several factors and tried to determine what caused her loss. One of the first ones we looked at was weather. We took a look at the weather. The reported weather all along this track was very nearly perfect. The Dorado, or the Gato class submarines were very seaworthy boats. They could handle a lot of weather, and there just wasn't any weather. So we know that weather didn't cause any issues. We took a look at the possibility of mechanical failure or operational accident. Operating a diesel submarine at sea is a dangerous thing to do. And if something goes bad, it doesn't take very much, the boat could go down. However, Dorado was a brand new submarine. It was recently certified by both Electric Boat and the U.S. Navy. So we understand that that possibility always exists, but we ranked it as fairly negligible in the ability to cause her loss. We took a look at attack by U-boats, specifically by U-boat U-214, which was known to be operating in the Caribbean at the time. There was only one other U-boat operating anywhere near the Dorado's track here in the Atlantic Ocean. That was U-518, and she was all the way up 870 nautical miles away in the Gulf of Mexico. U-214 actually survived that patrol, returned to Germany, and we were able to get a copy of her log, and U-214 did not record any attack on a submarine during that patrol. So an attack by a U-boat could also be definitively ruled out. The one that we focused on was on the night of October 12, 1943, a U.S. Navy PBM Mariner flying boat patrol aircraft reported an attack on a surface submarine in the East Central Caribbean, almost in the exact location in which Dorado should have been based upon her movement order. Let's talk about that attack for a moment here. So on the night of October 12, 1943, the Dorado is transiting through the East Central Caribbean on course 243 headed to Point Fox, right? Also in the Caribbean at that time was an Allied convoy, codenamed GAT-92. It was a convoy of 9 ships on course from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, en route to Trinidad to deliver war supplies. 9 ships escorted by 5 escorts. One of the other elements of GAT-92 is that she was under the cover of Patrol Squadron VP-210, based at Naval Air Station Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and there was a PBM Mariner with the call sign of 210P9 that was on patrol out ahead of the convoy. The convoy was coming in from the northwest and headed in this direction, and 210P9 was out patrolling in this area ahead of the convoy. Her mission was to look for German submarines, which were known to be operating in the area. This blue box represents the submarine sanctuary zone. Dorado could be operating anywhere in that course, or anywhere in that box, excuse me. And at the time, at this particular point in time, she was actually on course 310 degrees true. She was on part of her zigzag course, okay? So at 8:39 p.m. on that night, 210P9, the crew detected a submarine on radar, or they detected a surface contact on radar. They proceeded south along this line that's outlined in orange here. Along this line that's outlined in orange, until 10 minutes later, they got visual identification and they could verify that it was indeed actually a submarine that they had sighted and not some errant surface ship. Once they identified it as a submarine, the pilot put the aircraft into a hard right turn, and his intention was to loop back around and approach the target from the down moon direction. There was a full moon that night. And his intention was to place the submarine between the aircraft and the moon to give it a nice silhouette so that they could see it. Also approaching it from that direction also helped hide the aircraft from visual identification by the submarine. They were in the dark zone. It would have been very, very difficult to see the airplane coming from that direction. One of the major things here that has to be understood is that prior to taking off that afternoon, the crew of 210P9 received a briefing at the Joint Operations Center at at Naval Operating Base Guantanamo Bay. A plotting error had been made on the ship movement board. Dorado was thought to be 31 nautical miles further to the southeast than what she actually was. And when the crew of 210P9 were briefed, that's where they thought the Dorado was going to be. So when they picked up the submarine on radar, 31 nautical miles to the north, they made the natural and logical assumption that it was a German submarine. So they moved into attack. The chart in the upper right was actually taken from the Court of Inquiry document, and it shows what the crew of 210P9 described as the attack on the submarine. She bored in, and at 20:51, she dropped 4 weapons from her wing-mounted bomb bays. She dropped 3 Mark 47 aerial depth charges and 1 Mark 4 Mod 4 100-pound general-purpose bomb. This is the pattern that they believed existed when the weapon struck the water. 1 of the depth charges on the port side, 2 on the starboard side, and the bomb they estimated was going to be a direct hit on the center part of the boat. They know that 1 of the depth charges, the one here on the starboard side, this one, did not detonate because when they returned to base, part of the arming mechanism was still in the aircraft. So they know that one was a dud. The 100-pound bomb in the center was also a dud because it was dropped too low for it to arm. The other 2 depth charges, though, the first one and the fourth one, most likely struck the water right on target and detonated when it was supposed to. As soon as the ordnance was away, the aircraft commander threw the plane into a sharp left turn. Their intention was to circle back around and do a re-attack if it was necessary. When they arrived over the attack datum, they dropped a yellow flare. Remember that because it becomes important. They dropped the yellow flare, and all they observed was a large patch of bubbles and disturbed white water. The submarine was nowhere to be seen. They made the assumption that the submarine dove. They couldn't detect it anymore, so they continued on their patrol. So 210P9, and this is a representation of the aircraft. This is a little bit deceptive because Thaddeus actually modified this photo and put 210P9 on there. But this is a PBM-3S Mariner. This is the exact type of aircraft that conducted that patrol that night. 2 hours later, 210P9 is still on patrol. They detect a second submarine very nearly in the same vicinity. In between that time, the plotting error at the Joint Operations Center in Guantanamo had been discovered. The base sent out a message right here. This is a copy of the message. It says, "Details, plain language, friendly sub in area." The crew of 210P9 received that message, and now they're concerned, and the oops factor is way up in their head. So instead of immediately attacking the second submarine, they whip out their handheld Aldous signaling lamp, and they start flashing recognition signals to the submarine. The response from the submarine was that they opened fire with anti-aircraft weapons. They shot at them. They started jinking the airplane around. They went into evasive maneuvers. Nobody was injured. The airplane was not damaged. The pilot again circled back around with the intention of re-attacking, but by the time they got back to the datum point, the submarine had dove. They couldn't detect it anymore. They didn't have MAD gear or sonobuoys or anything like that. So they took off and they continued on their patrol and returned back to the base without incident. All right, so they returned back on the 14th of October, the day that the Dorado was supposed to arrive. She doesn't arrive. The base at Guantanamo, or the base at Coco Solo in Panama, they waited a couple hours just to see if maybe she was late. When she didn't show up, they immediately launched a search and rescue operation. They launched surface craft, aircraft. They all flew up and down the track. No evidence of Dorado was ever found. On the 15th of October, the base at Guantanamo Bay convened a board of investigation to investigate the incident. They had the power to administer oaths, and they talked to the crew of 210P9. They talked to the people at the Joint Operations Center. They did an investigation that lasted 10 days. And on the 26th of October, let me back up, the 24th of October, with no hope that Dorado was ever going to arrive at Guantanamo, the Navy officially listed her as overdue and presumed lost. 2 days later, on the 26th, The Guantanamo Command concluded the Board of Investigation. They came to two major conclusions. Both submarine sightings that night were on the same U-boat. That was their conclusion based upon what the crew told them, what the crew's testimony was. The second major conclusion is that no damage was sustained due to the lack of evidence or oil or debris. When 210P9 circled back around and crossed over the datum point, there was no oil, there was no debris. All they saw was the disturbed patch of white water and bubbles. So based upon that, the Board of Investigation came to the conclusion, those two conclusions right there. In hindsight, when you go back and read this report, and I'm going to try and phrase this as delicately as I can, it had every indication that this was an organization desperately trying to deflect blame off of themselves. You can take that for what it is. On the 14th of November, 1943, this issue had been presented to the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Ernest J. King in Washington, and he immediately convened a formalized court of inquiry with the full weight of the Department of the Navy and his office behind it. A retired admiral was assigned as the judge advocate, and they conducted another investigation, and they came to some surprisingly different conclusions than what the Board of Investigation did. They said it is highly probable that USS Dorado was lost through the attack by plane number 210P9. Despite the fact that the pilot was briefed incorrectly, they did decide that the pilot was not in error in deciding to attack. They decided that the tactical situation was actually favorable. But they also came out, conversely, and said that the crew of 210P9 had not been properly trained in distinguishing between a German U-boat and an American submarine. In other words, their training was very brief and stunted. They couldn't tell the difference between a German U-boat and an American U-boat even if they wanted to. So the crew's assertion that they bombed a German U-boat didn't hold water. All right? 2 years later, the war's over. 13th of September 1945, and American intelligence operatives over in Europe had the opportunity to find and examine German U-boat logs, and they drew up a memorandum for Admiral King. In that memorandum, they were able to examine U-214's patrol log from that night. There was a specific entry in U-214's patrol log saying that far off in the distance, on the horizon, they sighted a bright yellow light. That was the flare that 210P9 dropped at the initial attack datum point. So there's no possible way that initial attack could have been on U-214, because U-214 saw the flare off on the horizon. U-214's log also had an entry in it reporting the second attack. That was the U-boat that they attacked in the second attack. They were the ones that fired on the plane. It's all in her log, right? The memorandum also took a look at other U-boat logs, and they came to the conclusion that the 210P9's attack was not on the U-214 or any other German U-boat. Remember, the only other one that was even remotely close to the area was U-518, and she was 870 nautical miles away. And then lastly, the USS Dorado was not sunk by a German U-boat. Neither the logs of U-214 or U-518 or anything else mention any attack on a U.S. submarine on the date in question. So let's take a look at this here. It almost appears absolutely certain that Dorado was lost as a result of a friendly fire incident. But there's another very important data point to take a look at, and that's the use of the radio. Assume for the moment that Dorado survived this attack intact. What would they have done? The number one priority at that point is for the boat to get back up to the surface as soon as they safely could and send off a radio message that basically said, hey, USS Dorado here, stop bombing me, right? There's a precedent for that. USS Harder, under the command of Sam Dealey, passed through the same area several months before, and they were the recipients of a friendly fire attack. The first thing that Sam Dealey did when he could safely get back to the surface is fire off a radio message saying, stop bombing me, right? There was also several other incidences in World War II in which similar attacks took place There was one right after, on the day of Pearl Harbor, one of our submarines was trying to enter the harbor and they got bombed several times. Luckily, they weren't lost. So there's a precedence for this. So we know that Commander Schneider, the captain of the Dorado, this would have been his first priority. If they survived the bombing, I got to get back up to the surface, send off a radio message basically saying, don't bomb me anymore, I'm here, right? No radio message of any sort was ever received from the Dorado from the time she left Groton, Connecticut on the 6th of October all the way through to the time that she was lost on the 24th. No radio messages was ever received. Because of that, that is an extremely good indication that Dorado never survived the attack by 210 P9 and that she sank somewhere in the vicinity of the attack. We talked a lot about U-214 because there's another factor here to consider. U-214 was a Type 7D mine-laying U-boat. She had been specially modified and lengthened. She had 5 mine tubes in the center part of the boat that dropped mines out of the bottom. With that capability, U-214 had the ability to go out to the enemy shore, lay a minefield while she's completely submerged. Nobody would have ever known about it until the first ship hit the mine. It's a very nice capability. She was on a mission. The reason she was in the Central Caribbean at that time is that she was on a mission to lay a minefield off the mouth, the Caribbean side of the Panama Canal. And she did exactly that on 8th of October, 1943. This graphic also will show here, this graphic here will also show about where she saw the flare, right there along the track. So, did one of U-214's mines sink the Dorado? If you go on the Dictionary of American Naval Fighting Ships, DAMPS, and you can usually get to it to the NHHC website, they will tell you on that entry for Dorado that she was likely lost as a mine. That's some outdated information because Thaddeus put together this graphic and the one following, and we can definitively rule that out. Up here at the top is Point George. This is the point at which Dorado was supposed to rendezvous with her destroyer and proceed the rest of the way down to the harbor mouth, right down here, on the surface. U-214 later minefield right here. The points marked in red are the navigational points that U-214 claimed that they laid the mines. The points in black are the points in which American minesweeping forces detected and swept the mines. As you can see from the chart in the lower left, right here, the first mine was detected on the 9th of October, the very next day after it was laid, right? They immediately began minesweeping operations. So by the 12th of October, when the incident took place in the Central Caribbean, 3 of the mines had already been found and swept. So if Dorado was to meet the destroyer up here at Point George and proceed down this way on the surface, the only way that she could have struck one of these mines would have been on the surface in the daylight, and it would have been noticed immediately. There's no way that she could have covertly struck one of the mines. One of the other issues that we took a look at was the currents. Minefields, especially these moored mines like this, the mine cable will sometimes break and the mine will float up to the surface and drift off with the currents. Is it possible that Dorado struck one of these free-floating mines? Thaddeus did some research into the prevailing currents off Panama in the Caribbean at the time, right here. The currents all universally run north-northeast. So if any of the mines here had broken free and floated up to the surface, they would have drifted north-northeast in this direction, away from Point George, and away from the Dorado's course to Point George. Indeed, one of the mines right here, Mine I, had floated all the way up here past Manzillo Point and was finally spotted and destroyed on the 31st of October. That pretty much tells you right there that there is no way that the Dorado could have struck one of these mines. So that cause can also be definitively ruled out as part of her loss. So with all of this that I have said here so far, there are 6 logically based conclusions that we can come to. First off, aircraft 210P9 bombed a submarine on the night of 12th of October 1943, and that submarine was not a U-boat. Dorado, based upon the provisions of her movement order, would have been in the vicinity of the attack made by 210P9 on the night of 12 October 1943. Only the United States and Germany We were the only two countries operating submarines in the Caribbean at that time. Nobody else. If it wasn't a U-boat, it had to have been an American submarine. The Court of Inquiry determined that due to deficiencies in training, the crew of 210 P9 could not distinguish between modern U.S. and German submarines. So despite their assertions that they bombed a German U-boat, they were likely wrong. Dorado never arrived at Point George. No radio messages were ever received from her after her departure from New London, and no relevant debris or oil slick was ever found. There is a high confidence, and when I say high confidence, I mean 99.9%, that Dorado did not strike one of the mines laid by U-214 near the entrance to the Panama Canal. Weather conditions were considered to be excellent and well within the capabilities of the Dorado to safely operate, and the risk of a mechanical failure or an operator error causing her loss is low to negligible. That leaves us with one conclusion. Dorado was likely lost as a result of the attack by 210 P9 and sank in the vicinity of the attack. Before we go to part 2 here, which is going to be fairly brief, does anybody have any questions? Sir?
What's the average depth in that area?
In the area in which we believe that the Dorado was lost, it runs about 3,000 meters. So in excess of 10,000 feet. The Dorado had a test depth of 300 feet, which is her maximum safe operating depth, and the depth that is calculated to which her hull would implode due to water pressure is somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 550 feet. She would not have survived it.
And the depth where the minefield was laid?
The depth where the minefield is laid is going to be relatively shallow water. Probably, Steve, did you catch any data on that?
Yeah, I'm guessing this.
Probably less than 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
Yep. Anything else so far? Sir?
How difficult is it to distinguish between an American submarine and a U-boat at the time? Was it very difficult?
Well, it depends upon which U-boat you're talking about. The two major types that Germany was operating was the Type 7 and the other one was the Type 9. The Type 9 was a much bigger boat, and it had dimensions roughly similar to that of an American fleet boat. It was a little bit smaller, not quite as wide. The topside configurations were vastly different. I mentioned the conning tower fairwater there. The German submarines had a completely different fairwater configuration. But you got to remember the crew of 210 P9 was coming in almost from just off the port bow. They were moving at nearly 200 knots. So the time that they had to take an actual look at the boat is measured in seconds, literally seconds. And the crewman that was stationed in the bow compartment of the aircraft, he stated in the Court of Inquiry that it was probably 2 or 3 seconds was all that he saw of the submarine when they sighted it. That was about it. Sir?
Is part 2 the effort to go ahead and locate the submarine?
That is correct, sir. Yep. Sir?
How many submarines took that course during the war?
Very nearly every U.S. submarine that was built on the East Coast that went to the Pacific took a very similar course through that part of the Atlantic and the Caribbean because they all had to get to the Panama Canal. That's the most navigationally efficient way of getting from Groton, Connecticut to the Panama Canal.
And roughly how long between submarines transit?
Oh, it could be, in some cases, it could be a matter of days. It depends upon, how fast they were turning them out. On the East Coast, they were being built at the Portsmouth Navy Yard in Kittery, Maine, and at the Electric Boat Corporation in Groton, Connecticut. Those were the only 2 building yards on the East Coast at that time. Boston Navy Yard got into the submarine construction business way, way late, late 1944, early 1945. But it was mostly Portsmouth and Electric Boat on the East Coast. Now, there were submarines built on the West Coast at Mare Island in California, but also, I should also mention this because it's of local interest. Cramp Shipbuilding Corporation in Philadelphia, right across the river, also built submarines. So they didn't build a whole lot of them, but they did build submarines right here in Philadelphia, right on the Delaware River. So that shipyard, portions of it still exist over there, although Cramp's long gone. So Sir?
You had Manitoba too.
Oh yeah, thank you for reminding me. But they took a slightly different route. The boats built up in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, went down through the Chicago Ship Canal into the Mississippi River, and they exited down at New Orleans. So they took a very much different route from New Orleans down through the Gulf of Mexico into the Caribbean and down to the Panama Canal. Yep.
The exclusion zone. So that was pretty standard. What would be a possibility that the Germans would find out about it? You know, that would be a convenient place.
I suppose it depends. That's a good question. It depends upon how good the German intelligence were. I think any German submarine that you might find in that submarine sanctuary zone would be entirely accidental, because as I said, it was tied to the point of intended movement, so it was constantly moving. So in order for the German boat to deliberately try and go inside the zone, he would have to know exactly where the friendly submarine was. So what you say is possible, but it's extremely unlikely, because they would have to have detailed knowledge of the course. They would have to have detailed knowledge of the speed of advance, where the point of intended movement was, in order to be able to take advantage of that. One more, and then we're going to turn it over to Steve.
So that exclusion zone wasn't constant 24/7, 365 days a year, just when there was the sub.
Just when there was the sub going,
So
right.
It followed like a little block along where it's supposed to be.
Right, now in other locations, especially on some of the locations in the Pacific, there were permanent submarine safety transit lanes set up. And you were never to bomb a submarine in that zone. And that's where his point came in, that you could possibly hide in one of those if you were an enemy, if you knew that it was there. But in this case with Dorado, it was a constantly moving zone. So it would be dependent upon them having exact intelligence of how fast and where the boat was at in order to take advantage of it. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Steve.
Okay. Okay, so hopefully we convinced you, or Dave convinced you, that we understand what the likely cause of the loss of Dorado is. NHHC Director Cox was convinced that we did a thorough analysis, and that he believed that that was likely the cause as well. The bottom one. Okay. So let's talk about how we're going to develop a search area here. And it's fairly straightforward. So what we had we came up with 3 locations, 3 sets of coordinates for where this attack occurred at. We got some from the aircraft's report itself, and then some from the war diaries. There were 2 war diaries that were written by the commands there that had the same location. Then the Court of Inquiry came up with a 3rd location. Well, fortunately for us, these locations are all within about a nautical mile to a nautical mile and a half of each other, which is like it's within the era of navigation accuracy at the time. There was no GPS in World War II. So what we decided to do was take a mean geographic location for the center of these points to start with, okay? So we start with that mean location, we calculate that, of course, and we're not showing coordinates today because NHHC told us not to make the coordinates all public until a search is done and hopefully successfully done. So we're not going to do that today. But this location here, this mean location right here, the first thing we do, and this is based on people who have found a lot of wrecks, is put an error circle around that location. And the kind of rule of thumb is about 2 to 3 nautical miles. So we went on the more generous side of 3 nautical miles here. And the Dorado, we knew, was on a course of 310 at the time it was attacked, so it was going in this direction. And it was likely when they did that emergency dive that the captain would have kept in mind, dive and turn, full left rudder, full right rudder, right? Well, he likely did a full left rudder because he wanted to get back on his course of 243. So he likely did an emergency dive and a full left rudder, or near full left rudder, when he did that. So what I did was I laid out blocks here, search blocks, if you will. And I have some experience working with companies that have deep water search equipment, autonomous vehicles, if you will, that can handle these water depths. And about a 2 nautical mile by 2 nautical mile box is the approximate area they could search in one sortie with their vehicle, with one vehicle. So I broke it up into manageable blocks, if you will. And so we started doing that, these 2x2 boxes here that you see. We started laying those out together. And then we were able to get help from a company called Metron Incorporated in Reston, Virginia. And Dr. Lawrence Stone there at Metron, he helped find the USS Scorpion during the Cold War that was lost in the Atlantic. They also helped find the Air France 447 flight that was lost in the Central Atlantic, Southern Atlantic area. And they use a probabilistic model to figure out where's the most likely place for the wreck given the area that you've initially defined. And so this is what you see down here is their probability model. I won't go through those details today. I'm not sure I understand it, how all the probability math works, but I can tell you they've been very successful doing this, and they were generous enough to do all this gratis for us. And so what they came up with is our box, our bigger box, if you will, here, let's say it's a 6x6 nautical mile box. So it's basically 9 of these smaller boxes. That has an 81% chance of finding the Dorado if you search that 6x6. You want to get that up to 95% probability, you got to search 9x9, okay? So now we have an area to define, and we can also put a price tag to the search, if you will, in terms of cost, because we know how big an area we want to search, and we know the location of it. And so what I did was I used my network and my extended network, and we have recruited 2 companies to help us with this search. And we won't talk about their names today. They asked until we actually get something underway not to publicize too much because we don't want a lot of people contacting them and everything until we get going here. So when we met with NHHC and they gave us the green light, they said, your report's great, you can go public with it, keep the coordinates out if you wouldn't mind. And they don't have the funding to do this, of course. They're the History and Heritage Command. They're not a large, operational military command where they have, millions and millions of dollars to work with. So I asked Director Cox at the meeting, I said, sir, do you mind if we take this on as private citizens? And he said, go for it. So that's what we did. So what we've done, and you may have heard of this group, the U.S. Submarine Veterans group, and they have a charitable foundation. And I will point out to you, in case you can't read it, their logo says, shipmates caring for shipmates. Nothing more needs to be said there. These guys are brothers and sisters in the service, and this is the right place to help us raise these funds. And they were very, very happy to work with us. This is the first time that they will be doing something like this, because they typically raise funds for scholarships and for memorials at cemeteries for the lost submarines. So the scope of effort here we're talking about is probably 10 times what they would normally do, because we're talking about $100,000 a day to go search here, okay? And so you're probably talking about $500,000 minimum to do the core block or so. Well, the agreement we have with these 2 companies is if they have a boat with the capability on board, and they're in the area, and we have the funds raised, they'll go do the search for us. So our job is to raise the funds, probably next year, spring next year, maybe summer next year. But when these 2 companies do have work in these areas, or they transit, because it's a transit to the canal, so they transit through this area as well. So our agreement was at least these 2 companies, and we're hoping to recruit a third. We'll do this search on an opportunistic basis if we have the funds available. And NHHC was delighted that we recruited this group. They felt very comfortable with them. They know the 2 companies we're talking about working with. They're comfortable with them as well. So we have a core team, if you will, recruited now. So we feel this is a very appropriate venue here to kick this off today. The sub-vets kicked off the campaign at their annual meeting in early September. VJ Day, celebrating the victory or commemorating the victory in Japan. This crew was on their way out there to get involved, okay? They didn't make it, but they would have been out there fighting the battle as well. So, to me, that's the tie here to VJ Day is, here are the folks who never got a chance to get into the game, but were willing to do so. So this is our opportunity to commemorate this. We're committed to making this happen. It's going to take time. It's going to take money. And what I did is I have a little placard here. So and it also has our website link for the Dorado Project on it. If you want, when you have a chance here at a break or something, take a snap of it so you have it. You can go onto the website, as Dave said, and get all the details of what he talked about earlier.
One thing, due to a technical problem, unfortunately, the QR code does not work. So ignore the QR code, but you can still go directly to
This website right here.
right, the USS VCF site, or you can go to our site and get a link back to where you can make a donation.
Yeah, and you'll be able to see how much we've raised so far and everything else. And we're going to put a target number up there once I get a final, a better estimate from these companies. But we're using that $500,000 figure as kind of a rule of thumb right now, if you will. Okay, so that's the end of my pitch for the search area. But I think it's very doable. I've been involved in other searches before. We actually talked to someone, not Dr. Ballard, but someone who was with Ballard when he found the Titanic, had him review our package, and he says, looks good. You guys have done a great job. So we've gotten some external validation on what we're doing. Now we want to talk about the other aspect of this, and that's the Purple Heart Medal. And I think all of you probably know Purple Hearts were issued to people who were killed in action or seriously wounded in action during the war. Well, as it turns out, Thaddeus did an exhaustive check to see what boats, what lost submarines, World War II submarines, got the Purple Heart Medal. Well, there were 52 lost submarines in World War II, U.S. submarines. 4 of them, they were lost with the boat was lost with no loss of life, okay? So, I'm sorry, you've got, I'm going the wrong way again. Oh.
I think back button. There you go.
No, I'm going the wrong way again.
Let's see here. You need to go there.
No, there you go. Okay.
Yep. There you go.
So this is down here, right? Okay. All right. So 4 of the boats were lost with no loss of life. 44 boats were awarded the Purple Heart. So that's 48 out of 52. So we're now talking 4 boats that didn't get the Purple Heart. Well, 3 of those 4 were lost in training exercises or in a accident where 2 vessels collided. So they didn't get the Purple Heart. So the Dorado is the only boat that was lost in an active war zone, if you will. And of course, we don't know the final cause here, but through administrative issues or whatever, they were not awarded the Purple Heart. Okay?
And at this time, the Caribbean was considered a combat zone. German U-boats were known to operate there. Ships were being lost in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico and all up and down the U.S. seaboard. So the Caribbean was considered to be a combat zone. And if the Dorado was actually found in the Caribbean, she was lost in a combat zone.
And then you have to ask the question, do you qualify for a Purple Heart if you were lost due to friendly fire? The answer is yes. USS Seawolf, whoop, I hit it again, the wrong one. USS Seawolf was lost to a U.S. destroyer, was the depth charge by a U.S. destroyer. That crew got the Purple Heart. And 2 other boats, Tullabee and Tang, were actually sunk themselves with a torpedo that did a circular run. All 3 of those boats got the crews got the Purple Heart. So there is a precedence here, and even more so, I will mention 2 of the Dorado crew, through family petitions after the war, they were awarded the Purple Heart, 2 of that Dorado crew. So you have to wonder what happened. And when we were at the meeting with NHHC, Director Cox said, "Yeah, we need to get this corrected. This is something that we need to correct." So we're going to talk in a minute about what we're doing about that issue, separately from the search area work. On our website, we have a link where people can submit comments, family members and stuff like that. And so we've gotten several family members, a granddaughter of the commanding officer, Schneider, of the boat, nieces and nephews of some of the sailors on board have all endorsed what we're doing. And so we're very appreciative of that, and we work closely because we're doing this for the family members. We're doing this for the lost crew and the family members. So what are we doing about the Purple Heart? Well, Director Cox agreed that if we drafted up a memo, he would have his staff review it and assist us with the routing of it within the Navy. So he's not going to submit it for us because it has to be submitted by private citizens, but they will help us navigate the bureaucracy, for lack of a better term, to get this memo up to the right people to be considered. So we have an effort to do that. We turned that, here it says we haven't turned it in yet, but we actually turned it in about a week and a half ago to them for review. So we're waiting for comments back on the memo and the routing, and we're going to go ahead and submit that. Thaddeus has done 2 really excellent videos about the Dorado and the Purple Heart, and they're linked to our website. So again, take a snapshot of the URLs here. You can look that up and take a look and see those details. But we believe we're going to try to make the case for that Purple Heart even before we find the wreck, because it could take a while to find the wreck. And we're hoping to be successful with that sometime maybe early next year. I just want to make a very brief acknowledgments to the folks that have helped us, because it's been a team of 3, but it's really been a team of many more. Dr. Douglas Campbell, he wrote a book on Dorado. You may or may not be aware of it. He has a lot of the details in there, including almost a full version of the Court of Inquiry. He had other documents he had gotten through FOIA requests, and he was not able to be here today. He was invited, but he wasn't able to make it up from North Carolina. But he helped us extensively with the documentation and research. Nathaniel Patch is a government employee at the archives in College Park, Maryland. I've worked with Nate for many years. During COVID, Nate researched Dorado while the archives were closed. That was one of the projects he took on. So he had collected several documents as well, and he provided those documents to us. And he was actually in attendance when we briefed NHHC, which was really nice. So he was able to be part of the team that was represented there that day. Again, Dr. Lawrence Stone and Metron and his colleagues there, Dr. Douglas Marble, and an intern, Mr. Brady, he was actually the one who did the software programming for the probability map. So again, big thank you to them for doing all this to support our effort. And finally, Charles Hinman, who some of you may know, he is now the historian of the Pacific Submarine Museum in Hawaii, and he is also the manager of the On Eternal Patrol website for the lost submarines. Charles and Thad and Dave and I met at the USS Albacore Memorial. We were involved with Albacore in helping confirm its identity, the wreck. And that's where the genesis of our idea of working Dorado came out from Thad's interest in it. So again, thanks to Charles for his help and leadership here. And finally, I wanted to share a picture that to kind of keep in mind here. This is the last photograph of the crew and their families, which was taken at the commissioning party in August. Remember, the boat left in October, so you're only talking a couple months later when the boat took off. So this kind of, in my mind, kind of that image you want to keep in your mind. This is why this is being done. And some of these family members, their ancestors, will hopefully benefit from the knowledge and the closure that comes with knowing what really happened to their ancestors during the war. So we're dedicating this to them, and we're dedicating this to the submarine service in general. And we think we've pulled a really good team together here. We hope we convinced you that we've got a solid plan, and be happy to take any more questions. No other questions?
So the search is going to start in the spring of 2026?
The search will start when we have enough funds to at least do a couple blocks of searching, and the boat of opportunity happens to be in the area. So I'm guessing it's going to take us a little while to raise those funds. The companies have told us it'll be probably into early 2026 before they have one of those opportunities.
Right.
So we don't have anything scheduled yet, but we've got everything lined up, if you will,
Sure.
to try to schedule something.
We're also going to be approaching corporate donors as well, because obviously, Joe Lunchbox and Jane Lunchbox are not going to be able to come up with, $500,000 to fund a 5-day search. So we're going to be going after some corporate donors as well. We've got some contacts with Electric Boat. with General Dynamics, some of the other corporations that might be interested in putting in some of the big bucks. But we definitely need all of your help. We really, truly do. And you can help make a difference for those people right there, for the wives and the sons and the daughters and the uncles that were left behind. This is what we're doing it for.
And the grandchildren.
And the grandchildren, exactly. Being a submariner is like a community like no else in the Navy. I wear my dolphins with pride. My good friend Mike Burns over here has a tattooed on his arm. All right, that's how much this means to us. And you can help us solve this mystery. You can be a history detective, if you will, by helping us with this. Even if it's just a couple of bucks, it'll make a difference.
I just want to add one other point is when we did the Albacore, the widow of one of the crew members from Albacore was 101 years old when we did the final identification of Albacore. And I have a little video of her when they told her that her husband's final resting place was found. So don't discount the fact that there may be one or two of these widows still alive today. So we're doing this for all the generations, but also for the folks that participated actively. Was there another question in the back there?
How much, if any, does the Navy get involved with your endeavor?
Well, we coordinate everything we do with them. We're private citizens. We're volunteers with the Navy, which is kind of a unique situation to be in because we're not really subject to all the government regulations, but we try to abide by them. But we keep them informed. They were invited today. They weren't able to make it up here today, but we will keep them informed all the way through this. They will receive the data that's from the search area, and they will make the final determination that the wreck has been identified. So Dave will do his analysis that he talked about earlier. We'll submit a report to them. We've done this several times, and then they'll come back, ask questions if needed, and do a final ruling on whether it truly has been found. So yeah, we work very closely with them step by step. It's just unfortunate they don't have the kind of funding to do this. They do like shallow water work where it's much less expensive to do the searches. This is a massive effort. This is, I mean, you're talking about, it's not like finding the MH370 plane in the middle of anywhere. We have a pretty good search area. It's just that it is still expensive to do the search. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.